So I just wanted to talk really, really quickly about some concerns that I've had over the last 24 hours. So I think that we're all like in this new environment. We're all online. We're learning this new way. I'm learning how to teach online. It's kind of like a whole new experience for all of us. And I think that some of you might be really stressed out about this class, other classes, AP exam. And I think that you guys have a whole bunch of stress overtaking your guys' lives. And I apologize if maybe I haven't calmed you guys down enough or if you feel overwhelmed by everything that's been happening. I think that we were going really well before uh, the change to the AP exam. And I think as soon as the changes to the AP exam happened, I think everything kind of started to fall apart a little bit. And I think your guys' stress levels hit like peaks and are still going up. So I just kind of wanted to clarify a couple of things. So first off, if there was confusion about the not so typical and the one pager being moved, I apologize if I didn't make that clear enough. I had hoped that I had made that clear, but I think I didn't. And I think that because of that, a lot of people felt really overwhelmed from having those two projects as well as the new DBQ. And so if you felt overwhelmed these last couple of days, I really apologize. That wasn't my intention. We'll talk about in just a second kind of the changes that I've made to kind of alleviate some of those stresses. I also don't think I think I kind of rushed into doing the second DBQ, forgetting that we had just only done one DBQ. And so I think I expected in my head that everybody knew what they were doing when you didn't, which I apologize as well. So my hope is that by having a shorter lecture today, that we'll have some time to go over DBQs. And then just so you know about due dates and things like that. So if you look on Canvas, I've extended several due dates. So the DBQ I've now made due on Saturday. And the only reason I am doing that is because, and I'll show you later this in the DBQ section, we have meeting signups that if you want to meet with me and talk to me about how to write your DBQs, then I want you to meet with me. I think that number one, the biggest issue that's been going on is I think that I'm personally expecting a lot of you guys, and I don't think I'm taking into account your guys' personal stressors. And I apologize for that. That's my own fault. And I especially think over the last 5 days, I've made it even worse. So I want to kind of slow it down just a little bit. So I'm going to push that to Saturday, and that's not saying to work over the weekend, because I've gotten some people saying my kid's working over the weekend. You don't have to work over the weekend. It's just I'm moving that to be able to help you out. All of those who are talking about this, I will totally explain it in just a second about the layout. But I'm going to move that. Please sign up for meetings. And this is the number one thing that I'm concerned about. So I'm not going to name any specifics or any specific people. But I had a couple of contacts over the last couple of days where I heard from some people that said that they have been working 4 to 5 hours a day on my class, which should never be happening. And once I started to talk to some of those people, we figured out why that's happening. So if you're one of those people who feels like you're super overwhelmed, let me know. It should only be 3 hours over a 2-day period. And so I know you guys are kind of like hitting me hard in the comments and things like that. I'm sorry. I'm doing the best that I can. But hopefully by eliminating some of this stress and talking about it a little bit more, I think it'll be a little bit better. I think we were doing just fine like last week, but I think that the new changes and things like that have overwhelmed you guys, which I apologize for. I do think that part of the reason is slightly procrastination, only because I have been noticing a lot of people have been waiting till the lecture day to turn everything in. And so I think it's just kind of compounding over and over and over and over again. And I don't think it's just like your guy. I think it's probably 80% me and 20% individual issues that's going on. So hopefully we can kind of alleviate some of those stresses. I put this on the DBQ thing, and I'm going to talk more about it later. So this is the layout that I came out with you guys to be able to show you a little bit more about how to be able to do this. And this was my intention to have you guys have this printed out for the AP exam that you can just go check along. And I'm going to explain this more later in the DBQ section, since I know some of you guys have to go and things like that and don't want to stay for the DBQ section. But I want to at least have, I want to make sure that you know that this is here to explain how to be able to do that. Okay. So, I'll talk about this more later. I know some of you were saying, how many paragraphs should we have? It's kind of dependent on you guys, but if it were me, you have your opening paragraph, so that's one. I personally always prefer to have all of my categories as a separate paragraph so I can make sure that I define and explain really well. So because you have 5 documents, that means that more than likely you're going to have 3 categories. In fact, really you should have 2 to 3 categories with only 5 documents, 4 only if absolutely necessary. So saying you have 3 categories, so that would be opening paragraph, and then you have 3 categories, so 1, 2, 3, and then the complexity would be 4, and then restating the thesis would be the last one, which isn't really a paragraph. So I would more say it's 5, and the only reason I say that is opening paragraph, HC, and thesis, 1 for each of your categories, and then 1 for complexity. Complexity is, in this case, the effect, so it's the unicorn point, or the cause and effect, compare and contrast, whatever the opposite side of the T-chart is the unicorn point that's down here, which is only worth 1 point. So if worst comes to worst, you just do this. Most people combine it into 1 paragraph, but you can do 2. It's up to whatever you want to do. So I have seen a lot of people like to do mega paragraphs where they will have 4 paragraphs because they'll combine all of their causes into 1 mega paragraph that's like a full page long. That's kind of up to you. So I'm going to explain much more about this later, but this is just to give you an idea of what I have prepared for you guys for today to kind of alleviate some of your stresses. Sound good? Okay. And I will say, after this week, your workload is going to massively decrease in the class in terms of what I'm going to be expecting you to do. So it's going to go down quite a bit. It's just right now we're kind of rushing things because we have to hurry and get done with the end of the curriculum. Because if I elongated, it would only give us 1 to 2 weeks of review. So I have to either decide, do we want to go faster and have more work now, but have less work and more time to review? Or would we rather expand it and then have little time to review at the end? So I apologize. But one thing I would say is that if you are stressing out, please speak up to me. I mean, you guys are doing it right now in the Zoom chat. So you have plenty of confidence to talk to me. You just have to do it. So if you have a concern, if you have a question, if you feel like you're being overwhelmed, send me messages over Remind, send me an email. I would rather figure it out now compared to later. Emily, we're going to go over, starting next week, a ton of stuff on how to review for the AP exam. The reason I haven't been doing it now is because I didn't want people to feel overwhelmed, which they already were feeling overwhelmed. Okay? All right, so we're going to start today. So we're finishing up the Great Society, or I should say period 8, excuse me. So on your notes, what I would put next to, I might have to go in and mute you guys. I don't have this as small, but that's fine. Hold on 1 second. Oh, we have 3 people waiting. My fault. Okay. All right. So meet you all since you guys are all snacking. Okay. All right. So make sure to unmute yourself if you want to talk to me or anything like that. Oh, I can't minimize it. Okay, cool. So anyways, let me know if you need any help or anything like that, and then we'll kind of go from, actually, I need to shorten this a little bit, and we'll kind of go from there. Okay, so if you want to put on your notes, like the overall reaching thing about the topic of today's lesson, is that so this is going to be the politics day, okay? So this is going to be the day where we are going to solidify who are Democrats and who are Republicans. So for those of you who keep saying all the time, is this one the real Democrats? Is this one the real Republicans? Are we switching back and forth? This is the day that we officially solidify what is a Republican, what is a Democrat, and what does that mean? And yes, Bernie did drop out this morning of the presidential race. So anyways, and we're actually going to talk about LBJ and how he had a lot of very similar beliefs to what Bernie Sanders would be. But this does pretty much solidify Joe Biden as the Democratic candidate. All right, so let's go ahead and let's talk about overall things that are going on. So there's 3 major topics of today's lesson. The first one is the Great Society. And the Great Society is one of the most important topics on the AP exam. In fact, it would have been one I would have said could have been a DBQ because it is so important in this society. So if you want to put next to the Great Society, this is liberalism / the Democrats. So the Great Society is really what solidifies what does it mean to be a Democrat and especially a liberal in the United States. So this is going to be all of your HC. So there's two major things that the HC is going to come out with when we talk about all of these different things. So first off, a book comes out called The Affluent Society. And this basically said that Americans are spending way too much money on personal consumption when, yes, there is an FRQ quiz, but it's not due until like I think it's due next Monday or this Friday or something like that. So it's due for a while.
Is there supposed to be a PowerPoint up on the stream? Or?
Oh yeah, were you guys gonna like let me know that I wasn't doing that? Sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Sorry. My bad.
I just couldn't tell if it was called like the Affluent Society or something else.
Sorry. Does that help you?
Okay,
the PowerPoint that's up now? Okay, perfect. My bad. Okay, we're fixing that. All right, anyways. So, basically actually really quickly, I gotta fix something.
The PowerPoint also isn't on Canvas. Like on the page.
Okay. I can't put it on right now because it'll slow down the entire computer. So that is my bad. Sorry. I hope this works okay for today. Is that going to be okay or is it going to be a problem? Because the problem is I can't add it in right now. By the way, I saw somebody message me saying, why do I have a 0 on this quiz? Everybody's given an automatic 0 by Canvas. I can't control that. So if you're seeing 0s, unless you know for sure that you did not do it, that is the reason why. Is because it automatically gives 0s to everybody. So it just depends.
Are you still grading them?
I have 2 of the FRQ quizzes left. I graded about 70% of everything yesterday.
Okay.
You would know if it's not graded because it's still a 0. But it takes me 2 hours per FRQ quiz to grade them. So that's part of the problem.
I see. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so, that's definitely not what I wanted. Okay, hold on. 1 second, talk amongst yourselves. Okay, 1 second, sorry guys. Okay, so I believe I just sent you guys the PowerPoint over an announcement. So you should be able to have that. Okay. How am I doing? I'm incredibly stressed out. So I'm just as stressed as you guys are, trust me. Okay, anyways.
What's the note sheet supposed to be called?
Is the note sheet not on there either?
The last I have is the Vietnam War. I might not have just printed it off, but what's the name of it?
Did you go to the day by day?
I did.
Is anybody else having the same issue of not having the notes? Because I could have sworn I had put them in there.
I was able to get the notes.
Yeah, so I'm on the day by day, and the PowerPoint and the notes are on there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I'm just looking in the wrong spot.
Okay, perfect. All right. Anyway, so let's get started because we're gonna run out of time if I'm not careful. All right, so first off, here's the HC that I was talking about before. So the very first book is going to be called The Affluent Society, which I talked about before. So that's going to be a book that is specifically talking about why are we spending so much money on our personal consumption when we could be putting that towards the economy. And then the other book is called The Other America, which literally starts this whole idea of the war on poverty when it states that 1/5 of the United States was below the poverty line. In comparison, right now, our poverty line is at about 12%. So a huge difference in comparison between the two different ones. So basically one book says we're spending too much money on stuff that's not necessary, and the other book says we are in poverty. And because of that, our presidents are going to attempt to change this. So it starts with JFK. So JFK decides that he's going to come up with this idea called the New Frontier, which was supposed to fix all these problems, in particular education, healthcare, and civil rights. The civil rights movement, he kind of helps out a little bit. Education is massively impacted by STEM due to wanting to win the space race, but he doesn't really succeed in really revitalizing the individual society issues that are going on in the United States. Well, that brings us to LBJ. When LBJ comes in, he is the truest liberal out of all the liberals. He's the guy that if you go to the dictionary to look up liberal, LBJ's picture is right there. And the reason why is because he comes up with this idea called the Great Society. And this is a star term, very, very important, and it impacts a lot of you guys today. So the Great Society is basically where he wants to expand social welfare programs, liberalism, and democratic ideology, as in Democrats, as in the political party. Again, the cause of this, or the HC of this, is this idea that post-war abundance is going to the wrong place. And then also the quality of life issues are making it very clear that while some are very affluent and rich, others are not at all. The opponents of this are going to be Republican conservatives. So this really begins, well, if you want to write down, this begins what's called the New Right, otherwise known as the conservative movement or neoconservatism. If you are in AP Gov with Brody, he talks about that as well. So basically, the Great Society is trying to get rid of poverty. So he is going to create over 700 different things that are going to try to fix the poverty issue. So another comparison that I saw a couple years ago was comparing the New Deal to the Great Society. And both of them did attempt to end poverty or end economic or social issues in the United States. So that would be a really good comparison between the two. So he declares this official war on poverty to get rid of all the poverty issues going on in America. Now he creates this office called the Office of Economic Opportunity. This is going to be the programs that are going to oversee all these various issues and things like that. So think of the Office of Economic Opportunity as the top, and then all of the various organizations and programs are going to come out of that. So let's talk about some of the changes. And I want you to think in your head, how many of these do we still have? Okay, so it's talking about education. So the idea was that with so many people under the poverty, wait, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. Okay. Anyways, so the idea was that if you can improve the education of kids, you can reduce the amount of poverty in the United States. So, for example, it starts with the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So what starts this Elementary and Secondary Education Act is that they are going to start to provide schools, in particular public schools, as well as parochial schools, so like Catholic schools and things like that, public funds to purchase textbooks and new materials. This is actually the very first time that any federal funding was provided for schools below the college level. So all of a sudden we receive all this stuff. So do you guys remember a couple weeks ago I sent you guys a survey to be able to do CTE stuff? So that determines our federal aid through that act. So this is definitely something that you can still see today. The Child Nutrition Act is going to start really expanding the free and reduced lunch program in America. So if you don't know, and you can actually see this at our school, well, not at our school anymore, but just around, you have free and reduced lunches. And so what that means is that if you are under a certain income level, you can receive free or reduced lunch. It all depends on how much money your family makes. So when my husband was growing up, he grew up in a single parent home where they made less than $15,000 a year. And so because of that, he received free lunch and breakfast every single morning and lunchtime. And the whole idea of that is that you should not receive less just because you have less of an income. So in some situations, it can be really dire. So part of the reason I always hear when we have, so this is why Granite stayed open when we had the snow day, is because there are people that depend on those lunchtime programs. So last week at one of the Granite schools, they had 1,000 out of 1,200 students come and get a free lunch even while we're out on school closure. So that's a really big help and a benefit to a lot of people to be able to have that. For some people, so at my last school, there was a lot of kids that was their only meals of the day because when they went home, their parents couldn't afford dinner. So it gave them that opportunity to be able to have that. At the same time, they have the Higher Education Act, which is going to be the very first time that you get federal scholarships. So for those of you if you've ever heard of FAFSA before, so FAFSA is going to be in this Higher Education Act. FAFSA either does two things. One, gives you grants. So if you are under a certain income level, you get your school paid for free or reduced. Or two, This is also going to be where you can get your federal loans if you want to be able to go to college. Head Start is another really good one. So some of you might have been part of the Head Start program. So the Head Start program is where low-income families get free preschool. So we actually have a Head Start school. I don't know if any of you are in the GTI and you guys are doing the preschool program over at the GTI at the Granite Building. So that program is the Head Start program. So it provides free preschool to kids under a certain level of income. And it also provides lunch programs and different things like that for schools around. So education's probably one of the biggest ones that's impacted, but probably the one most of you guys have received the benefits from, or your family, is the healthcare programs. So if you've ever heard of Medicare or Medicaid, both of those programs come from the Great Society. So Medicare is care for the elderly. So that's how I remember it, care for the elderly. Basically what this, the reason why this came out is because in the 1960s, less than 50 or over 50% of the seniors in the 1960s had no health care. And so because of that, they needed a program to be able to help people when they got older. Now, because of this, 1 in 3 people rose above the poverty line due to the institution of Medicare in the 1960s. Medicaid is different. Medicaid provides health care for the poor, and it differs from every single state. So here in Utah, we are more conservative. And the conservative side of Utah says that we should reduce the amount of, or we should increase the income level. So instead of being like $25,000 a year, it's like $28,000 a year, to provide less in Medicaid compared to a more democratic state such as California or New York, where there's a lot of people who have the ability to get Medicare or Medicaid, especially compared to here in Utah. So somebody was asking, does the free and reduced lunch program contribute to the poverty issue? What I would say with that is part of the reason why Medicaid, Medicare, and really a lot of things are very controversial. You have it on both sides. So I want to show you really quickly. You can see in this chart, the amount of people that are enrolling in Medicare has massively increased. So you can see that we only had 5.3% of Americans on Medicare. Right now, that percentage is about 19% of people in the United States are on some sort of a Medicare plan. In terms of overall, you can see we are one of the smallest amounts of Medicaid spending. So this is aiding people who are in more impoverished areas compared to some of these other places like California and New York. There's, of course, going to be a massive issue of people concerned. Would you want to make less? An example that I can kind of be able to give you of that is a personal example. I knew of a high school student who came from a very impoverished family. His family has been on free and reduced lunch. They receive checks and things like that to be able to provide for their family. This kid wanted to get a job at Lagoon. So he gets a job at Lagoon for the summer. The problem is the money that he earned from Lagoon went to that family income level. It pushed them over the amount that they would receive to have free Medicaid and as well as some of the tax rates. So instead what they did is they massively, they told him he had to quit his job because they wouldn't have that. Now, that's part of the reason why a lot of conservatives will say we should not have a Medicaid or a Medicare program and things like that. You have to realize that a lot of people are going to abuse the system no matter what. No matter what system you give, there's going to be some sort of a thing that's going to happen that reduces that. In fact, right now with the CARES Act, if you go on unemployment, so here in Utah, if my husband, for example, so my job's not in jeopardy, but my husband's is a little bit in jeopardy. If he becomes unemployed, he can get from the state $250 a week from unemployment. The CARES Act is also giving everybody $600 no matter what job that you had a week if you're unemployed. So in theory, my husband could be making $800 a week, which right now is more money than he makes at his current job. And so because of that, there are some concerns with the CARES Act. Will people stay unemployed for the next, I think it's funded through December or something like that. Will they stay unemployed instead of going back and getting a job? Overall, with all these social welfare programs, in my mind, you have to think of the positives. There are a lot of people that do not have the money to be able to pay for this and all those different things. So it kind of just depends. You're going to have, everything's a two-sided sword. You're going to have one side that's going to say we should expand it. You're going to have one side that says we should reduce it. One side that says more people need it. And one side that says you don't need it because you're just going to do this and that. So it's really hard to be able to do it. In terms of everybody trashing Wyoming, that's not very nice. Go look at the population of, and somebody mentioned this, go look at the population of Wyoming and South Dakota, and you will realize there are very few people. In fact, I think the population of Wyoming is around 800,000 or something like that. Of the amount of people in Wyoming, South Dakota is around the same amount. And so because of that, they're automatically going to have less spending. So Idaho, for example, has about 2/3 of the population of Utah. So you can see that we're very similar, but what is different with our population. Somebody was asking, why does Texas have so much? Look at Texas and Florida. These are both areas where a lot of people who are older will choose to retire there. So the Medicaid spending, especially as they get more towards retirement, as people 50 years and older will start to move towards Texas and Florida. And to be able to get that. Another thing as well is you have to remember their population. If I remember correctly, and I might be wrong, and I'm sorry if I'm wrong, but I believe Texas is the 3rd or the 4th highest populated state in the United States. So they're automatically going to have a lot more Medicaid and Medicare spending compared to other states. And yes, that's part of the reason we have the Electoral College. Does everybody make that? And no, potatoes are not famous in Wyoming. That is Idaho. Idaho is 80% of the world's potato exports, in case you want to know. Also hops for beer. That's another one. So anyway, so this is another one as well in terms of the Medicaid system. So 45% of all births are paid by Medicaid in the United States. Part of this as well is people who are higher poverty levels tend to have more children due to lack of access to like birth control and things like that. 39% of all children in the United States have Medicaid coverage. This is, again, when you start to get people who are concerned about whether or not Medicare and Medicaid should be a thing. Again, you have to think of the people who need it, not the people who are abusing the system. For me, I think this especially came when I had a baby last year. So last year when I had a baby, my bill came back to me that I owed $2,200, which is very, very low in comparison to the national average, for giving birth to my baby. At the same time, I had a former student, who was on her 3rd child, and she had birth a week after me, and she posted that she wasn't going to have to pay for anything at all. Now, I also understand, though, at the same time that am very lucky that I have a profession that gives me a lot more wealth compared to her. However, in her situation, they're making under $15,000 a year. And so part of that issue is you have to realize is, again, double-edged sword. You're going to have people on both sides of the argument of what should we do with Medicare and Medicaid and things like that. I hope I answered everybody's questions about Medicare and Medicaid. Many of you guys probably have experience with these, which is why would she have 3 kids when she's not financially stable? Well, I will tell you one thing is that it is a right for everybody to have as many kids as they want. I will say that statistically, one of the issues is that people in more poverty areas have higher amounts of children. And a lot of that is lack of access to, for example, birth control is one of the biggest things. And I agree with Elpitha. You can't assume a lot of things in certain situations. I do know that in this girl's case, you do have to remember too, so Skyline's very unique because when you look at Skyline, you don't see a lot of the issues that higher poverty areas do. So when I think of my former students, I would say that out of all my former students who have graduated in the most recent couple of years, I would say probably 80 to 90% are on their first or second child. And the vast majority of my students had kids while they were in high school. You don't see that as much as Skyline, but you do see that a lot more in other areas as well. I have a student that's one of my former students that has fathered 8 kids, and he is 20 years old. So you have to realize that a lot of these issues, it is true you're not aware of the certain situations. I'm not going to say who from last year, but a student at Skyline last year who was one of the top 3 students of our entire school of the graduating class, her family makes less than $25,000 a year. So we just don't have no idea. And that student, by the way, is going to one of the most pristine colleges in the world. on a full ride academic scholarship at a school that's 110 grand a semester. So I just want to point out that we have no idea. It's not Cindy. That this is a student from last year. So Cindy is going to Princeton or Harvard, I believe. One of those two. Okay. Anyways, so moving on from there, it's not Kate. Kate's going to Harvard too, but I'm not going to tell you who the student is because I doubt you would guess it anyways, even if you did guess it, okay? It's not anybody you have mentioned. So the next one is housing, which is another one that a lot of you guys have probably experienced in the past. So you have the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and basically what they're going to do is they are going to create cheaper housing for people to be able to live. I don't know which one Cindy has been, she won Sterling Scholar, and I feel like it said she was going to either Yale or Harvard. I just can't remember which one she's going to. The Department of Housing and Urban Development is in particular trying to address the issue with African Americans. So at this time, African Americans, almost 50% of African Americans are under the poverty line and living in really horrible locations and slum-like environments. And so because of that, they want to be able to create a cheaper way to be able to live. So what happens is they create this idea called subsidized housing. And we have to be very careful when we talk about this as well. And I saw it with the Medicare and Medicaid thing. We don't know a lot of student situations, and a lot of you guys might be in the situation. So just be aware of that as you go into the chat. But basically what this means is you have subsidized housing. So let me give you an example. At my last apartment, they had 8 of the apartments that were designated as subsidized housing. So all of our rent was $1,200 across basically all the apartments that were in the area. Well, what if you, for example, are in a family where you make less than $600 a month? You cannot afford to live there. So you have 2 options. The first one is you either become homeless or you live in very impoverished areas and very dangerous areas, or 2, the government subsidizes your housing. So how it works is you apply for what is called Section 8 housing, which some of you might live in. And what that does is that while I pay $1,200, you pay, let's say, $300, which is how much you can afford. And then the government pays that additional $900 to close the gap between the two. So we're both giving the same amount to the housing complex, but the difference is you're being helped by the government while I'm paying my $1,200. And so what happens is that you have people that are in poverty, but they're not living in poverty. So for example, this is one example. This is a housing complex that is in Midvale. If you look on the outside, you wouldn't think that the people here are under the poverty line, and yet that they are. In downtown Salt Lake, so this is right across the street from Vivint Smart Home Arena. This is a brand new complex that the apartments right across the street from it are $2,200 to $3,000 a month. But here, this is subsidized housing, so you're more than likely paying between $300 and $600 a month for your family, but it doesn't appear to live in it. So what it does is it benefits people, it gets them out of poverty. 2, it gives them a nice place to be able to live even if they are in poverty. And 3, wouldn't you want this way more than slum type environments, bad environments? This is where we hear the projects, for example. The projects were especially in New York and Philadelphia. They were attempts to make this in the 1960s and 70s. However, they failed miserably to do that, which is what created impoverished areas in those cities. Now we have fixed the problems that happened in New York, LA, and Philadelphia, and we are now in this environment, but still when you go to those areas, it is the poor housing projects that were from the 1960s and 70s. Oh, okay, Black Panther. You guys have watched Black Panther? The LA place in Black Panther where all that drama happens and things like that, that is an example of a housing and urban development, a Section 8 project. And the Section 8 project in there shows you the slum environments. And you are correct, this guy's going to get hit by the train. He probably shouldn't have crossed the street. Okay, anyway, so immigration, this is also going to massively increase immigration into the United States. He basically opened up immigration to especially people with families. That's one of the major differences. This actually begins Latin American immigration into the United States. So if you notice, our immigration numbers massively skyrocket after this legislation happening in the 1960s and 70s. It's also changed. So if you notice in this, we started with the majority of people in Europe. And then after this, it's now mostly going to be Latin American and Asian. And that's because we emphasize now family reunification rather than just immigrating to another country. So priority is given to people who are in families. Environment, this is also going to be where they massively fix all the environmental issues in the United States. So this is going to get you guys really icky, and it's going to make you not so feel good. We're going to start with Silent Spring. So basically this lady writes this book called Silent Spring. And what they found out is that the planes that were dropping pesticide, the pesticide was killing people and giving them cancer. So imagine all of the fruits and veggies and things like that you eat were covered in these pesticides. And because of that, they ended up, and of course, I'm now forgetting the name of it. It's the D one. If anybody can remember the name of the pesticide, and now, of course, I'm forgetting what it's called. But anyway, so what happens is they ban that. And so now they have much more friendly pesticides and things like that because people were so sick. And yes, so that's what it's called DEET. There you go. That's what I was looking for. But anyways, so what happened with, and DDT is the correct term, you are correct. Thank you so much, guys. Chemicals in the water is what led to the Clean Water Act because people were dumping it. We're going to talk about that actually in a little bit when we get to the 1970s. Why is the plane so low? These are called crop dusters. So you have to have it low because if not, the wind will take it and push it off of your crops. So and I guess you guys don't see this a lot in Utah, but I'm from Idaho where like everything is open. But when you're driving along I-85 to Boise, it'll go really, 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 really low to be able to get that. Other miles, I'm not sure what you mean by do you understand me, but anyways. So consumer protection, here's the last one that we'll talk about. This is one of the biggest ones that impacts you guys. So before I show you the next couple, do the pesticides they put in your crops now harm you? I'm going to leave that to your guys' debate because that is really dependent on political beliefs as well as your environmental beliefs. All of our stuff has pesticides. Whether or not it's bad for you is up to your own opinion, but it is much better than it was before. So Unsafe at Any Speed specifically referenced all the safety issues going on with cars. So for example, and what I mean by is it scientific though, it's for example the same reason why a lot of people are anti-GMO is while anti-GMOs are scientifically safe, a lot of people say that they are actually not safe. Same exact sign with pesticides. Pesticides are, according to the FDA, safe for you to use, but people also say that it's not safe for you to be able to consume. So like as a parent, I hear a lot of people say, for example, that they won't allow their kids to eat with plastic spoons because plastic spoons are bad for you. Or for example, Teflon. Teflon is, if you have any sort of like saucepan or things like that, Teflon is what most of you guys have, which is the non-stick pan. A lot of people say that non-stick pans have the chemicals of the non-stick gets into your food all the time, which is why they say you should use cast iron instead. So it's all dependent on what you guys totally want to decide. So anyway, so going back into all the issues going on with your cars. So if you ask your parents or if you look at your parents, the vast majority of people who don't wear seatbelts are parents. And the reason why is because they grew up at a time when seatbelts were not required to be used, which is in the 1960s and 70s. It wasn't until this guy came out with this Unsafe at Any Speed where people realized, oh, wait, if you have a seatbelt on, you survive. Or if you, for example, have an airbag, you are more likely to survive. Or if you don't put kids in the front seat, you are more likely to survive. And so this completely revolutionized all the issues and it massively reduced motor vehicle deaths in the United States. Now, I want to talk about this Consumer Product Safety Commission because this is one that's going to impact you guys in particular. And let's see if you guys know who this guy is. Anybody know who this guy is? Anybody? Or what movie he's from?
Star Trek. Star Trek.
Thank you. It is from Star Trek, okay? So this is Scotty from Star Trek. And the problem is that, and this is kind of the sad part, so this guy is dead, okay? So what happened is that he was at his house and he was driving this like super fancy Jeep truck, or Jeep. I don't know what that is. So anyways, he's driving this Jeep and he pulls into so he had an automatic door. And so he moves his car up and his driveway was at like a slant. And he parks his car at the bottom of the slant while it's still on. He puts the parking brake on, or not the parking brake on, excuse me. He puts the car into park. He gets out of his car because the gate was having a malfunction. So he leaves his car running in park. He goes behind his car. and then he shuts the door. And when he shuts the door and he goes back to be able to shut that back door, what ends up happening is basically the car, they didn't know that the Jeeps had... Okay, 1 second. Somebody's getting in trouble, by the way, it sounds like. So anyways, so what happened is that basically the car, there was an issue with the gear shift and it slipped into reverse and it rolled over him and then it pushed him. It's not ha ha ha, by the way. I hope you're referring to the other issue that's going on. I think we should, I don't know if you're laughing at the person dying, but anyways. So what happens is that it smushes him up against the door and he literally suffocates to death. Well, what had happened is Jeep had been told several times that this was an issue, and it ended up resulting in his death. And so the consumer protection, they ended up suing Jeep and fined them, I think it was something like $40 million. And you are correct, there was a lawsuit. They ended up, I think they gave him, his family, something like $50 million because of that. The Fast and Furious, though, I would say is a little bit different because when he died, he was also driving like 100 miles an hour. So a little bit different on that one. And he might have been the passenger, but regardless, though, they were driving really fast. So let me give you an example that some of you guys, if you've been to Europe. So this is what's called a Kinder Egg. And here in the United States, I always hear people say, but we have Kinder Eggs. No, we don't. Kinder Eggs are banned in the United States. They've been banned since the 1990s. A Kinder Egg looks like this, and it has a little toy inside. And the problem is that in the 1990s, kids were eating it and then choking on the toy that was inside. So originally it didn't have this capsule. So then they made the capsule and people were still choking on it. And so instead they banned the Kinder Egg by this Consumer Protection League. Because basically what they said is that this was too dangerous in the United States. So over in Europe, they are completely allowed. When you get on the plane to come back to the United States, you are told that it is perfectly legal until you enter customs, and then you have now broken the law. Any guesses on how much of a fine it is per Kinder Egg if they find it in your bags? If you want to put in the comments, if anybody has an idea. See, 1, 500, 1,000, 1,200. So per Kinder Egg, oh, that's a lot of money. So per Kinder Egg, it is a $1,000 fine. And that is per egg, and the average Kinder container has 4 to 8 Kinder Eggs. So if you have one of those containers, that's 4 to 8 grand that you get punished. And if you say, oh, it's only, bad if they catch you, I know of somebody who got caught. So when I was coming back from a teacher trip, because teachers are bad, on this teacher trip, we were all coming back from Germany, and this person bought like 8 because he was like, they're never going to catch me. Well, guess whose bag was searched? And he got an 8 grand fine and a 3rd-degree felony for bringing illegal contraband into the United States. So I just want to point out to you, don't be sneaking stuff in that you're not supposed to, because this is one of those examples of what it is. Okay, so, and then overall poverty, other issues that they did too, we talked about the Economic Opportunity Act, in particular Head Start. This also begins the food stamp program. So if you don't know how food stamp is, this is also called WIC. And basically what happens with the Food Stamp Act is you get a certain amount of stamps, and it used to be stamps, but now it's on like a little debit card. And then each month you get a certain amount of money that you can spend. So for the average family, it's about $110 per month. It depends on what your family is. And then you're able to buy food for your family. So that's in this as well, and in the Housing and Urban Development Act. So, and we're going to skip job skills because we're running out of time. Arts and humanities, in particular, the National Endowment for the Humanities. President Trump has requested to completely eliminate this section of the organization. So basically PBS, NPR, museums, libraries, all the funding for that through the NEH. It's been requested for 4 years to eliminate that funding. That's where I go on all my cool teacher trips. So I hope it doesn't cut because I want to go on cool teacher trips still. But they have suggested to get rid of that. And I wouldn't say it's because of education. A lot of people are saying, is it necessary, for example, to pay for people to go on these teacher trips? Or is it necessary to have PBS or whatever it could possibly be? So in terms of the Great Society, was it good or was it bad? It depends on who you talk to, but I would say overall, most people say the Great Society was a complete failure. And basically what happens with the Great Society is that all the funding begins to move away. So basically, so you can see that here, Vietnam, you have the Great Society, it's just destroying our U.S. economy. He's carving out all these different parts of the U.S. economy and leaving nothing left. Especially Vietnam is the turning point. As soon as Vietnam starts, too much money is going. You can't have both Vietnam and the Great Society. You have to choose one of the two. And a lot of people, so you can see, this is the LBJ budget. The money starts to go to Vietnam instead of going into healthcare. And then you can see as well, war costs cut off the Great Society hopes. So that took way, way, way longer than I thought it would. We had a lot of stops and goes. So we're going to hurry through the 1970s so that we can end this early. Which way? That way. Okay. So basically what happens is Richard Nixon is going to become the president, which we're going to talk about Nixon's impeachment in just a second. He ends up advocating to help with China and Mao Zedong with what is known as ping pong diplomacy. So basically what they did is they created a ping pong team and they sent it over to China and they learned how to play ping pong for 2 years. And the whole idea was this really nice, like, camaraderie. It's kind of like the World Cup, bringing all these countries together. And so what happened is that they ended up having this really, really cool thing where they played ping pong. And if you've ever seen Forrest Gump, he does the ping pong diplomacy because he's sent over there. I believe it's a national game of China, but I'm not 100% sure. But I think that it is. I'm not 100% sure. So let's talk about Nixon getting impeached. So here's basically the breakdown of what is going to happen with Richard Nixon. So first, he is elected in one of the closest elections in United States history. I don't know if you can see me going red. I keep going red in my little screen, but I don't know if you guys can see that. Then the Pentagon Papers get released. So if you guys remember, we talked about the Pentagon Papers and how it released all the secrets of what was happening in Vietnam. So in order to be able to stop this, he sends out what is called the Plumbers Unit, and all of this is secret. So he sends out the Plumbers Unit to find who leaked the Pentagon Papers. That was the entire point of this. And what they do is they secretly burglarize the apartment of somebody in the defense analysts that had been looking at what had happened with the Pentagon Papers. Now that begins all of these like secret surveillance. So it starts really with Watergate. 5 men are arrested at the Watergate Hotel for breaking into the offices of the Democrats. So basically, he breaks into the Democrats. But again, nobody knew that this was connected to Nixon. So these 5 men get arrested for bugging the Democratic offices. Well, then what happens is basically they find that a check that paid these burglars had been earmarked, so basically set aside, by the Republican Party, which was Nixon's party. And in particular, it was Nixon's campaign group. But again, Nixon comes out. He says, this has nothing to do with me. There are obviously bad people in my organization. I'll get rid of them. I promise. At the same time, he gives a secret order to destroy all papers associated with this group of people. And then he also asked the CIA to to urge the FBI to stop all investigation into what had happened with this break-in. But again, nobody thinks this has anything to do with Nixon at this time. Then it's found out that basically the Attorney General had been controlling a secret government fund to spy on the Democrats. But again, nothing connected to Nixon. So the FBI starts to establish that the Watergate break-in was a massive attempt at political spying. And again, Nixon says it has nothing to do with me. And Nixon is actually reelected in one of the largest landslides in American history. This is the final vote. So I want you to notice how much red for Nixon there is. So even though there's all this scandal, he says, it has nothing to do with me, I promise you. And that's when it begins to all fall apart. So first, 7 of Nixon's direct aides are all indicted for what happened at Watergate. Now, this leads to what's called the Washington Post. So if you've ever seen the show The Post, that's what you will see when you end up watching that movie. So basically, these guys find out all this secret information that had been happening with Watergate. And there was this guy, and okay, I'm going to say his name, and we're going to be mature adults. Everybody got it? Good. So he had a pseudonym, and his pseudonym was called Deep Throat. And basically, he was this secret guy that was going to reveal all of this stuff that had happened with Watergate. So what happened is that this guy, comes out and basically reveals all of this information regarding the Nixon administration and says that Nixon had ordered this break-in of the Democratic location. Well, what happens is, why was that his pseudonym? I have no idea. He actually didn't reveal himself until 2005, and then he died shortly after that. So we don't know where he got that name from, but that's the name that he got. So because of this, the Senate begins to investigate what had happened in Watergate. Now, during this investigation, they discover that secretly the White House had been video or audio taping everything that happened in the White House. Well, what happens is you have all these Nixon tapes. So it's easy. All you have to do is reveal the tapes, and then everybody will know that Nixon was telling the truth because everything that was in the White House had been secretly recorded. Well, what happens is Nixon says he will not turn over these tapes. And the reason why is, and I'm going to skip some of this, is because he said that, sorry, I'm skipping ahead a little bit. So this is the Nixon tapes. If you've ever seen anything with Nixon, that's what it's talking about. And I'm just skipping ahead just a little bit. So he refuses to hand over these tapes. And then he immediately does what's called the Saturday Night Massacre, which is where he fires everybody who had testified against him in the Senate. So everybody that had anything to do with saying anything bad about Nixon and the tapes, he fired everybody in a single day. Now people want more and more to impeach him with what had happened. So they tell him, you need to hand over the tapes. And he says, no, I have what's called executive privilege. And what executive privilege means is that as the president, you are a higher power than everybody else. And because of that, you do not have to do what the Senate or the House says because you are the commander-in-chief. You are the highest guy, and you don't have to bow into what other people are telling you to do. So he says that because it's the most powerful branch, he has all legal immunity to help in this investigation regarding Watergate. Now, if you're interested in connecting this to today, Trump, during his whole impeachment thing, did a similar thing. So he issued executive privilege saying that the full Mueller report did not have to be released. And he claimed that executive privilege, and it did take an eventual order to be able to release that full report to the public. So basically what happens is he gives them an edited transcript of what happened. And again, he says, we promise that we are innocent. And we will get into what happened with Ford and things like that. Now, he gives this edit, but here's the weird part. 18 minutes of it are missing. So basically what happens is that there's 18 minutes of this missing. Now, he said his secretary accidentally stopped the recording and it was her fault. Well, the thing is that people start to say, is that what would have revealed that he had done Watergate? And that's where you get this famous one where he famously said, I am not a crook. But then there's this weird 18-minute gap going on in the tapes. Well, in the end, the Supreme Court orders that Nixon must turn over the tape recordings, and the House of Representatives officially begins the impeachment process. He is brought with 3 different things, which is obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and contempt of Congress. These are the same things that Trump were accused of, except for contempt of Congress. He was not accused of that, but he was accused of the other 2 things in the impeachment trial. Public mounts against him very much to get him impeached, and instead he resigns. So he was never impeached because he resigned before he was fired. So according to the U.S. government, he has never, ever, ever been impeached. He was impeached in the House, but he was not impeached in the Senate because he quit. And immediately afterwards, the next guy, which is Harold Ford, ends up pardoning him. Now, the reason why is the same exact reason of what's happening with Trump. Trump has been impeached in the House, but not in the Senate. What that means is he could still be criminally charged, just like in Nixon's case. So instead, Ford, his vice president, pardons him completely. So you were impeached, but it is not ever officially confirmed. So what basically happens is that he pardons him so that he can never be convicted or anything like that. And then he was never officially charged, as in he was never gone through the charging process because he was pardoned, which means he can never be in trouble for what he did with Watergate. If he did Watergate, which is officially not, because he was never impeached officially or convicted because he quit instead. Any questions on the impeachment? Yeah, he was impeached but not charged, which it's because he's pardoned, so he doesn't have any ability to do that. Okay. Did they ever get the tape? Nope. The tape has never been found. Again, like he said, is the person paused it on accident. Okay. So I have a little bit more time left, so I'm going to hurry and get through the rest of this. Let's see. I only want to talk about what's going on. So I want to point out one thing that happens in the 1970s as well as we go through a really famous oil crisis. So OPEC, which is the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, basically what happens with OPEC is all these countries control almost 90% of the world's oil. And what they decided to do is they can control our politics and other politics based on their pricing. So basically, and Miles, we're not going to go into that. That's a whole nother thing. But I will tell you, though, do make sure that you know there are people in this group that might be impacted by the Israeli issues. I'm only skipping it because of time. Okay. So anyways, so what happens with OPEC, though, is that when they want something done, they're going to do something about it. So what happens is in the 1970s, there's all this huge, massive crisis issue that's going on in the Middle East. America supports the sides that OPEC does not want, in particular, the establishment of Palestine and things like Israel and Jewish land in Palestine and things like that. So what happens is that OPEC massively skyrockets our prices. So imagine going from like $3 a gallon to almost $35 a gallon almost overnight. And this creates a massive crisis because we don't have enough oil to be able to supply in the United States. So we have this massive oil crisis where we had a massive shortage for several years. It completely destroys our economy. People lined up for hours and hours and hours. I remember in 2008 when we had an oil crisis that we lined up for hours and hours and hours. And again, Sarah, that's why I was mentioning to Miles, we need to, I would normally go into Israel and things like that. We just don't have a lot of time. Maybe I'll do that in the period 9 step to kind of explain it again. But Israel-Palestinian issues is very, very, very controversial. So just, yeah, you are correct, Sarah. Do be careful about that, okay? So at the same time, Jimmy Carter, who's going to be the president at the time, is going to try to be able to calm things down by creating peace between Israel as well as Palestine. That worked for a hot second, about a year and a half, and then they went right back into chaos. So they did attempt to be able to solve some of the issues in the Middle East and things like that, but it did not go as well as could possibly be. But it all culminates in what's called the Iranian hostage crisis, which basically in the Iranian hostage crisis, the Middle East, with all the stuff that was going on in the Middle East and things like that, they were very frustrated and angry. They ended up taking the Americans that were at the American embassy in Iran hostage. This is actually Jimmy Carter being burned as a member. You can see the CIA right here, and then this is a figure of Jimmy Carter. They end up taking all of the Americans hostage, and they keep them hostage for 499 days. And basically they said they would not. So this is the really famous, a couple of years ago, I think it's Fargo was the name of the movie, where they attempted to rescue it, but it was a total failure. It took them until Ronald Reagan was elected to be able to release all those hostages. And then once they did release it, they said that the only reason that they would release the hostages is if Carter went out. So Carter and Ford, so Ford only has one 4-year term because he pardons Nixon, so nobody wants him. And then Carter, this destroys Carter's presidency. So we're kind of skipping through a couple of these because I'm going to kind of focus on a couple of these. We're going to talk about the Iran-Contra affair. That's actually in next class periods thing. So I'm just going to kind of skip a couple things. One thing I did want to point out is is Jimmy Carter still alive? Yes, and extremely controversial. Jimmy Carter is the oldest president that is still alive. He actually, you can go to his church. So he is a pastor now. And what he does is he does every Sunday, except obviously not right now with COVID, but he does a church sermon that you can attend and you can listen to him speak to you. He is a very, very controversial figure. He went into the presidency under he was a Democrat and under the umbrella of, I'm always going to be honest with you. Well, the problem is the economy was horrible. So he was always like, America's in a horrible economic state. And then also additionally, he really was bad at delegating. So he always thought that he was right, even when he was always wrong. So Jimmy Carter, yes, he is still alive though. So basically the economy of America starts to really crumble in the 1970s. Basically what happens is we massively rise our imports. So if you can notice, we only have, back in 1947, it was very low, but we have massively skyrocketed over here on the right of the amount of imports. Because of that, we started to lose money because we were importing a lot of stuff that we would normally be exporting. And so our economy begins to go lower. Additionally, we had this thing called stagflation, which is basically where our unemployment skyrocketed, but then our inflation skyrocketed too. So you have really high costs of goods and you have really high unemployment. Most of this is due to the debt from the Great Society, so that would be your HC. But basically what ends up responding is America thinks to be able to solve it, they throw money into the economy, which makes inflation skyrocket. So the government ends up being a whole mess. So this was the highest misery index in American history. Was almost 20% of Americans said that they were miserable because of the economy that was happening in the 1970s. And then I'm going to go ahead. Gerald Ford, one thing to know about him, he did this thing called détente, which is the relaxing of relationships with the USSR, basically saying we were going to calm it in the Cold War. Jimmy Carter, I talked about before. I'm going to kind of skip a whole bunch of this stuff that we've already talked about because we are running out of time. A couple of things as well that happens. This is evangelical churches. If you want to put next to this conservative, basically churches skyrocket in the 1970s because people are worried that liberals are becoming much too liberal. We've had Roe v. Wade. We've had civil rights movements. So instead, we want to go back way more conservative. So basically, the Christian church believes that the sole authority of the world is the Bible. And basically, that also goes into the government as well. Ronald Reagan, when he was elected, he had this organization called Focus on the Family that was a conservative Christian organization. And anytime he had to make a big policy change, he consulted this Christian organization to ask them what they should do. At the same exact time, they had the moral majority, which basically said everything was collapsing and they need to become more conservative and more Christian. So if you want to put next to this, this is really starting the rise of conservatism in America and going back to a more conservative nature. So if you think about today, people who are Christian tend to more likely be Republican. That is what we're talking about when we get to that evangelical churches. Is it okay to consult an organization when making a policy? People do it. People are not happy about it either. So especially church ones, that's very much been lessened of what people should do. However, overall, I would say no, but it happens anyways. Okay. All right. So I got 5 minutes left and then we'll go on to DBQ stuff. Sorry, this took a little bit longer. We kind of talked a lot about Medicaid that I wasn't expecting. But really quickly, new conservatism. Is there supposed to be separation of church and state? Yes. But at the time, in the 19th, so this is what you need to know. And again, Miles, be really careful. You've been getting very political today. Be very, very careful about what you say because we do have so many varying opinions in this class and in Utah as well. But anyways, so with new conservatism, if anything, I would say Utah is a new conservatism, and it's called the New Right. So if you remember, the New Left was the liberal protest in the 1960s. The new conservatism is the New Right. So this is, you guys know, hey, you're a left or you go more right. This is the spectrum we're talking about. So basically, this is going to be Ronald Reagan, and it solidifies what does it mean to be a Republican. So everything that you know about conservatives comes from Ronald Reagan. He is the truest of the true conservatives. And basically, Ronald Reagan is going to be anti-tax crusade, very much the modern-day Republican. Cut as many taxes as possible because the government shouldn't tax you. Basically, if you notice, this is going to be the Republicans today. Increase military spending. That's exactly what we have. Cutting domestic spending, cutting out programs we don't need, and cutting the federal income tax. Anybody know of a current politician that this describes? Anybody? Trump. That's exactly what I was trying to say. So look at this bullet right here. Comes into the presidency with 3 priorities. Increasing military spending, Republican. Cutting domestic spending, get rid of Obamacare and liberal things. Cutting the federal income tax, cutting as many taxes as possible. Ronald Reagan, I would say, is very, very similar to Donald Trump in the amount of the policies that he has, in particular the economic policies. And Reaganomics is this idea of cutting these issues. So cut federal programs such as food stamps and Social Security, lessen those amounts, very similar to cutting out the Obamacare and the Medicare and Medicaid spending. Massive cuts in federal spending, massive cuts in domestic spending. Labor unions defeated. Are you guys noticing how this is a very much a tried and true Republican? Again, a lot of these, especially with tax cuts, is what the modern Republican would be. So again, the 4 pillars of Reaganomics, reducing federal spending, especially with taxes, reducing more federal spending, reducing government regulation, and tightening money to support inflation. This is literally Republicans. This is exactly what Reaganomics is. And we talked about that. So this is very similar. So I want to combat the thing that says this kind of sucks. Let me explain why tax cuts are supported by Trump and by Reagan as well. So if you notice, this was the taxes where they massively reduced the taxes of businesses in the United States. So if you notice, so Apple took the reduction in taxes and gave bonuses to all their employees. Walmart raised their minimum wage, as well as Amazon. So the idea would be trickle-down economics. Help the businesses, and it will eventually go down to the working class. So basically, the only big problem is with Reaganomics is it did massively increase the federal deficit. Because there's no taxes, the government has to continue to borrow money to pay for the issues that are going on. And we will talk about that later. Okay, so that is it for this time period. That took 10 minutes longer than I expected, so I apologize that we went over. But the three major things that you need to know for the FRQ quiz and about today. So you have 1, Great Society and liberalism. 2, economic failures and really bad stuff going on with the economy and worldwide in the 1970s. And 3 is going to be Reagan and the start of the new right, otherwise known as Reaganomics, otherwise known as conservative. Really the biggest trend throughout all of this, how did America transform into the Democrats and the Republicans, liberalism and conservatism? Okay, so